So I think we could say that succession, understand time as a representation or representation of time, uh, acknowledging that a line or linearity is inadequate. We might say that, and this is a kind of Kantian idea, that time as succession is the representation of representations. Uh, Time is what allows other representations to be possible. It is the form of representation itself. And so time for Kant is prior to and superordinate to space. He says, since all representations, whether or not they have outer things as their object, nevertheless as determinations of the mind, themselves belong to the inner state, right? Because everything that we experience is received and brought in and processed by us. Everything converges in the mind, right? So, since all representations as determinations of the mind belong to the inner state, all representations are determinations of the mind and belong to the inner state. Because of this, while this inner state belongs under the formal condition of inner intuition, and thus of time, so time is an a priori condition of all appearances in general, and indeed the immediate condition of the inner intuition of our souls, and thereby also the immediate condition of outer appearances. In other words, time is the condition of everything, of our experience of the external world, because every spatial experience that we have also necessarily happens in succession, and every inner experience happens in succession. Time is the sort of fundamental intuition that allows for experience of both outer and inner world. Because all our experience of the outer world is filtered through the inner world, our experience is processed by the mind, and the mind is inner and governed by time. Time is the ultimate condition of our experience. To put this simply, this is not actually what Kant will say, but I think this is another sort of way we could think about this. So this is not precisely Kant, but it's interesting to think, right? We are time. And there's something Aristotelian about this also, right? Our soul, our being is the amount of time that we have, our moving through time, and everything that we are is conditioned and shaped by sort of the amount of time that we have, both our lifespan, but also the rate at which we live, the rate at which we process information. We've talked about the difference between the perspective of a mountain, a tree, and a human being from temporality, right? So as a kind of, if we think of ourselves as temporalization, I think we can grasp one of the most fundamental ideas of all of philosophy, right? That the human subject is a form of temporalization in some sense, right? And we can think not just of Aristotle here, but also of Plato, right? We remember that transcendence, one way to think about transcendence and the way that the forms are transcendental, is to think of transcendence as instantiation. And we discussed instantiation as the temporalization of a form, right? Of an idea. Ideas plus time is transcendence. And that is what Kant is saying to some extent also, right? That our a priori concepts when they become temporalized, when they become right, introduced to the external world through the intuition of space-time, where time is the privileged and grounding term there, we have a transcendental subjectivity that is able to connect the sense data of the world to these a priori ideas. That's transcendence. That is what Plato is trying to explain, right? That we are temporalization means that that intuition is temporalization for Kant. Means that, or is the way that our ideas are able to be fit to sense data. Right? By temporalizing sense data, we allow that sense data to be brought to our a priori concepts, and thereby transcendentally connect the external world of sense data with the inner world of pure reason and a priori thoughts. He writes on 181, in this, therefore, consists the transcendental ideality of time. Right? And that phrase, the transcendental ideality of time, describes exactly what I just tried to describe in many more words. Now, again, just like space, this time is objective as far as the world of appearances is concerned, as far as our experience is concerned. Right? We can talk about objective time. But it does not apply to that noumenal realm that exists independently of us, which exists without being filtered through our subjectivity. So, right, it is only of objective validity in regard to appearances, because these are already things that we take as objects of our senses. But time, is no longer objective if one abstracts from the sensibility of our intuition, thus from that kind of representation that is peculiar to us, and speaks of things in general. Right? So time is objective, but only to the world as it is given to us. Now there are a couple objections that Kant goes through at this point, but we've already dealt with those, more or less, primarily having to do with motion and alterations, that they're real. If you want to review those are on page 182. Right? Kant says, of course alterations are real. Time is certainly something real, namely the real form of inner intuition. It therefore has subjective reality in regard to inner experience. Right? So again, he's simply going to say, yes, alterations and motion are real, but only real insofar as the world is given to us. It is therefore to be regarded really not as an object, he says, but as a way of representing myself as object. All right, so this is the essence of what he's saying in the Transcendental Aesthetic, and so we'll have another Zoom meeting, and I'll set up some office hours for next week, and we can go over some of this. This is really difficult material, but we'll conclude with Kant's sort of summation of the Transcendental Aesthetic as a whole on page 184. He says, finally, that the Transcendental Aesthetic cannot contain more than these two elements, namely space and time, is clear from the fact that all other concepts belonging to sensibility, even that of motion, which unites both elements, presuppose something empirical. For this presupposes the perception of something movable. Right? So there are no other forms of pure intuition. The Transcendental Aesthetic has no more elements. Motion is not part of it because it will involve some empirical object that does not come strictly from ourselves, but must be combined with some sense data that is given to us. So Kant is looking for just that which is the form of our sensibility, that which is only ours, relies on nothing external. Again, a kind of Cartesian project. And he says that the forms of intuition are just space and time. There is no other essential part of our sensibility. And thus, Kant concludes right, that the most fundamental elements of physics are in fact the most fundamental elements of our subjectivity. So sometimes people will refer to Kant's metaphysics as a kind of Copernican revolution. So Copernicus showed that it is not the sun that moves around the earth, but the earth that moves around the sun. And similarly, Kant shows that it is not our thought that, it's not the physical world that grounds our thinking, but it is our subjectivity that grounds the physical world. All right, so with that, I will conclude the discussion of Kant. We'll have certainly an opportunity to come back to it when we start discussing Schelling's investigations in the essence of human freedom for our next lecture, which I'll get off to you as soon as possible. All right, that's all for today, and see you next time.